Good evening, and welcome to our program celebrating women political leaders. My name is Tamara Martin, and I'm the California State Archivist. I have had the honor of serving in this role since 2019, and we are pleased to have you join us this evening as we celebrate 3 new oral history interviews created in partnership with the Oral History Center at UC Berkeley. Tonight's program will include a panel discussion and question and answer session with Senator Loni Hancock, Senator Fran Pavley, and Senator Lois Wolk, who will discuss their careers and impact on California. Each is a trailblazer in the State Assembly and State Senate authoring important legislation. Tonight's program is moderated by Dr. Todd Holmes of the Oral History Center of the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley. The oral histories we are celebrating this evening were created as a part of the California State Government Oral History Program of the California State Archives, which is a division of the California Secretary of State's office. The California State Archives was created in 1850 by California's first law. As the oldest state entity here in California, the State Archives is responsible for collecting, preserving, and providing access to our state's historical records, serving the public for over 172 years. The State Archives collects records from the legislature, state agencies, and California courts, as well as is home to some local government records and private donations. With over 350 million records, the State Archives is proudly one of the largest state archives collections in the country. The California State Government Oral History Program was created in 1985 with the passage of AB 2105 and is a program of our division. Since that time, we have partnered with universities throughout the state to create and provide access to more than 200 oral history interviews with past and present state leaders. We are pleased to continue to document the critical stories of Californians through this program, providing a unique insight into how our state has evolved over its history. We want to thank our panelists tonight for their important contributions to California, as well as for sharing their stories as a part of this program. Before we begin, I want to mention a few housekeeping notes. Tonight's session will be recorded and streamed on our Facebook Live. The recording will be available on the California Secretary of State's YouTube channel. Oral histories completed as a part of the California State Government Oral History Program are available for you to read, listen to, and explore on the California Secretary of State's website, which we will post a link in the chat. The interviews that you'll hear about tonight are also available at the Oral History Center's website as well. Please post any questions you have in the Q&A box, and our team will collect those for the question and answer session at the end. Now I am pleased to introduce California Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley N. Weber, who will provide a welcome and introductory remarks. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Shirley N. Weber, California Secretary of State. It is my honor to welcome you here tonight to our program, Celebrating Women Political Leaders, a discussion with the Honorable Loni Hancock, Fran Pavley, and Lois Wolk. Tonight, we will host a panel discussion in partnership with the UC Berkeley Oral History Center and a question and answer session as we release 3 new oral histories featuring these influential state leaders. We welcome our esteemed panelists, the Honorable Loni Hancock and the Honorable Fran Pavley and the Honorable Lois Wolk. We also welcome our moderator, Dr. Todd Holmes, who is a historian and associate academic specialist with the Oral History Center of the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley. When I was appointed California's 30th Secretary of State in January of 2021, I was excited that I had the responsibility of the State Archives, which holds our state's historic treasures. Our archives hold over 350 million records and is proudly one of the largest state archives collections in the United States. With a team of dedicated staff, our state archives collects, protects, and provides access to the historic records of our state, including records from the legislature, the state agencies, the governor's office, California courts, some local government records, and some private donations. The records in our collection come in many formats, from paper documents to maps to photographs to audiovisual records and electronic records. Oral histories are another important part of the historic records as they capture perspectives or can recount events that may not be captured in any other record. They are the experiences of people who lived and made history. The California State Government Oral History Program was created by AB 2105 in 1985 to preserve California's legislative and executive history through oral history interviews with individuals who have had a significant role or impact on public policy. Directed and overseen by state archives, this program enhances the historical understanding of legislative and executive processes and policymaking in California. This systematic and disciplined effort to record history on tape, preserve, and make it available for future research compensates for gaps in the official record. It serves in part to document California's institutional memory. Over a period of more than 20 years, the program has produced more than 200 interviews through partnership with oral history programs at California colleges and universities, capturing the stories of California policymakers, legislators, and other key players in state history. Interviewees are identified by a nonpartisan advisory committee, and interviews are conducted by university-based oral history programs. Our team has digitized the previous interview records and transcripts, and they are available on the Secretary of State's website. Through our ongoing work with our university partners, such as UC Berkeley, new interviews and content will be added on as an ongoing basis, and you can hear more about this later in the program from our state archivist. Before we begin, we would like to extend our appreciation to Dr. Todd Holmes from the UC Berkeley Oral History Center for the hard work that he and his team put into capturing these important interviews. We would also like to thank the members of our Oral History Advisory Committee, who provide recommendations for interview subjects, as well as other university partners for making this program a success. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and please do enjoy the program.
We want to thank Secretary Weber for the introduction and for her ongoing support of the California State Government Oral History Program and the State Archives. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Todd Holmes, who is in U.S. political business, environmental and agriculture history, as well as California and the American West. At the Oral History Center, his projects range from Latinx artists and the founding of Generation of Chicano and Chicana Studies to the history of the California Coastal Commission and the experience of West Coast cannabis growers. He also serves as one of the lead historians for the California State Government Oral History Project, which featured interviewees such as Governors Jerry Brown and Arnold Schwarzenegger, forthcoming, as well as projects on the state signature Global Warming Solutions Act. We want to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Todd Holmes, and I will pass it off to him to introduce our honor panelists and begin the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tamara, and good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be part of this special event this evening and have a chance to talk with our three honorees, Senators Fran Pavley, Lois Wolk, and Loni Hancock. Senators, thank you again for joining us tonight. Your oral histories, which we celebrate the release of tonight, offer an in-depth look at your distinguished careers in both houses of the legislature, where you served between 2000 and 2016. I'd like to dive right into the questions regarding that time and actually start off with perhaps discussing the beginning of your political careers. In your oral histories, all three of you reflect on your time in local government before coming to the legislature. Maybe talk a bit about how your experience on the local level helped you prepare for your service in both the Assembly and the Senate. Senator Pavley, why don't we start off with you?
Sure. Thank you very much, Todd, and thank you for what it must have been like interviewing all three of us for so many hours. We'll have to take you to lunch sometime. So anyway, I thought that was a really important experience, my local government experience. Incredibly valuable. Learned a lot of things. First of all, I was served as the first mayor of Agoura Hills 40 years ago this year. I was just a child, as you can imagine, but seriously, I needed to learn to work with the other four members of a brand new council, many of them who didn't share a lot of the same priorities that I did. We all got along fine. I didn't tell them I was the only Democrat on the council, because what I like about local government, it is nonpartisan, and the goal is to put the city first. So being a young mayor, I had to figure out how to relate to people 10 to 20 years older than myself and build common priorities, common ground, and make sure we had a good working relationship, and we did that. But what I learned were things like how to hire and interview and especially work with staff, because the staff's working full-time every day, and we're part-time legislators if you're in the smaller cities like I was. I learned how to be a good listener, listening to residents, but businesses and other people who I hadn't interacted with. But I also thought being a local government officials was very helpful in connections with organizations like the League of California Cities or contract cities down here, and where I could compare notes, frankly, or pick up the phone, no email back then, with mayors and council members in other cities that were similar, and get ideas and things on how to work together to accomplish more regional objectives. So those kind of skills were directly relevant to allowing me to sort of hit the ground running, if so to speak, in Sacramento.
Well, thank you. Senator Wolk, you, of course, were served for the city of Davis, as well as on the Board of County Supervisors for Yolo County. How did that experience help you prepare for your time in Sacramento?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. It's good to see you again, and thank you for all the efforts that you've put into this. I appreciate it. And like Fran, I thought it was a very valuable experience. I'm not sure anything could really have prepared me for what it's like to enter the assembly. I've often told folks that the best preparation for the job was being a soccer referee or a junior high school teacher. And I still believe that. I served for 8 years on the city council and 4 as mayor and with the Board of Supervisors. And like Fran, and I'm sure like Loni, I came to the legislature. I had learned about what it was, what real government was, just not what you read in the textbook. How to solve problems, how to work with staff, that's extremely important, how to work with very energized, active citizens, as we had in Davis. I also, on the Board of Supervisors, had to represent other cities in Yolo County who were very, very different from the city of Davis, and also the unincorporated area. I learned how to be effective at achieving a goal. I had successes, but I also had some failures, and both were very important in teaching me a great deal. I was introduced to the assembly and to the legislative process by being with CSAC, serving on CSAC, representing my county, and representing the city of Davis and the League of Cities. So I got an introduction to areas I was interested in, like water, social services, and the environment. But I think local government grounds you. It is the most, it's really the closest unit, I think, to the California system. And it's very important, and it's very important in the Constitution. There are a lot of very important responsibilities it has, and that's different than other states. So I think it was really essential.
Thank you. Senator Hancock. Now, I didn't have the chance to interview my friend and colleague, Amanda Tweez, had that honor. And I think she is also joining us tonight. But your turn. How did your service in Berkeley help prepare you for your roles in the legislature in Sacramento?
Well, like my 2 colleagues, I know that the local level is very, very important. Now, I was elected as an advocate back in a time when there was a lot of turbulence in Berkeley, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement emerging, all of that. And it's different once you're elected. So for me, it was extremely important. There's a difference between stating the case and negotiating the solution. There's a difference between advocating passionately and implementing a negotiated solution. I think all of us served on the budget committee in the legislature, and local government also teaches you the importance of oversight and of learning the budget backwards and forwards, because that is so often the place where real change happens. So I I also want to agree with Lois. There is a huge difference between our little 10 or 5 city councils, 5-person board of supervisors, and the hurly-burly of the 80-seat legislature assembly. And I was very heartened in my first weeks in the legislature when a Republican woman colleague said to me, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Oh my God, when do you think? What do you, everything moves so fast." She said, "Yeah, a lot of us spend most of our freshman year crying." And we didn't necessarily, but there's going to be a learning curve no matter what. And local government is a great place to learn what governing is about.
Thank you. Now, I think for all three of you, your elections to the state assembly, where you all started off, occurred just a few years after California voters implemented term limits for elected officials in 1996. And of course, in the political spectrum, I mean, opinions vary widely on the pros and cons of term limits. What are your thoughts on its impact? And Senator Wolk, let's start with you.
I love this question. On balance, frankly, it was good. In my case, certainly without term limits, I think Tom Hannigan would have remained in the legislature probably for another decade or two. And my predecessor, his successor, Helen Thompson, frankly, would still be in office today. Now, it is true that some experience was lost, can be lost. But the other side of the coin, when you have unchallenged office holders, they do tend to become stuck in a rut. They become stale and frankly, block the way often for new vision, new ideas, new demographics. And we were certainly part of the increase in representation for women and youth. They get older, and the older they get, you lose that middle and the youth importance. I believe, from a further back perspective, it's anti-democratic to have term limits, in my view. You have elections, and that is the term limit. But you know what? When it comes to being an incumbent at the state level, that's not like the local level. They can stay a very long time, Incumbency really rules, and probably still does for those who choose to stay.
Thank you. Senator Hancock, what's your view in regards to term limits?
Well, I have to agree with Lois. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you make room for new people, new ideas. There is a sense of urgency. You can say, well, I have X number of years to make the impact that I want to make. On the other hand, there is a huge learning curve, I think, in terms of issues and in terms of process, how the process really works. And one time I happened to have lunch with a group of what I call the grand old men, the people that were there for years before term limits. And they were talking about how many years it took them to do their most important legislation. And it was like John Knotts, 21 years to get CEQA, Nick Petras, 19 years to get the first pesticide legislation. What I think we've all learned with our limited time is that big ideas take time and you have to pass the baton. We've all had bills that we championed in the beginning, couldn't get through the legislature, to have some of the people that have come after us actually push them over the finish line. So it's like everything in life, probably. There's good things about it and problems with it.
Senator Pavley, of course, you've authored some very controversial and very important environmental legislation that proved also very technical. What are your what's your view on term limits?
Well, you can argue both sides of this. I always wanted the ability to pick who stays, though. You know, and who has to leave. I'd like, you know, some little, respected organization to say, because you had some really outstanding people I would have loved to have served with, that I barely got to know. Maybe they were there for the last 2 years or 20 years, and I greatly admired them. And then in other cases, there were some you could tell their energy was gone. They didn't have a vision. Of what the future looked like, and they were frankly taking up space. And California was in a position now where we were starting to make changes. We needed to diversify who was in the legislature, so we look more like California. And I'd like to share with everyone, it was shocking to me to find out that women weren't even in the state Senate till 1976.
Mhm.
And really, that's not that long ago. It's the same year my daughter was born. So that was surprising. And so I think the number of women and people coming from different backgrounds changed dramatically, because this was not going to be a full-time job anymore, right? A full-time career. And good for those people who probably could have had very good careers who said, you know what, I'll serve 14 years in the legislature. And instead of moving up the corporate ladder or whatever they were doing in the outside world, and really it became more of a public service kind of dedication to it. So pluses and minuses, I think overall it's just been good. So you asked me on the technical questions, things, the way I solved this sort of moment of panic when I went into the legislature, and my background actually made me perfectly suited to being a success in the legislature. I taught middle school for 29 years, so it was a smooth transition. Lois sort of mentioned my parallel. It's all too true. Sheila Kuehl, who was my predecessor and was in the state Senate, when I realized, you know, I had a background in education and local government and environmental things, but really those other areas, I could never serve on those committees, and I didn't have enough years to really become an expert on them. And so she gave me some very good advice that I took, and I think it made a difference. She said, you know, in the era of term limits, pick 2 or 3 issues that you really care about, be on those policy committees, focus on that for all 14 years, make a difference. And that's what I did. If you look, I was on the water committee all 14 years, or I was on the environmental committees. And I thought that was, in a term limited world, incredibly valuable advice, because as you become more of an expert on it, you start attracting the staff who also cares passionately about that policy issue. And so hiring the best staff and having them have some expertise in the building, which helps you navigate the halls of the Capitol and work within the system, is incredibly important too in the term limited environment. I don't know if I think this change, and I understand why it was done from 14 to 12 years, was a good thing, because what happened before, the assembly was sort of the learning area. Those of us who were in the assembly, we usually served 4 to 6 years before running for the state Senate, and there were 80 of us. So it was like sort of like middle school or junior high school. So we were learning everything for the first time, right? And then we would all graduate, if we were lucky enough to get elected to the Senate, to a House of only 40 senators. But all had that, almost everyone had 4 to 6 years of experience in the assembly. So there was a big difference. Now it's 12 years in either house, and you have first-year legislators showing up in the Senate as well as the assembly. And I think that's, well, maybe leveled the playing field in both, but it's changed. In many cases, people are only serving 12 years and then they're done, because they're not shifting back and forth and not running for office every few minutes. So pluses and minuses in the changes that have been made. I think overall, you just have to figure out what's the smartest way to work within the system and do the best you can to make a difference on behalf of your constituents in the state. So.
Well, all three of you served the full 14 years in the legislature in both houses. Looking back, what is one of the things you're most proud of from your time in the legislature? And Senator Hancock, we'll start with you this time.
Okay. Well, you know, I did work for 6 years in the Senate on criminal justice reform, which was very important to me. I had wonderful staff. I had great allies and advocacy groups, and we began the process of turning that big ship from an incarceration machine to effective reentry for people as safe neighbors. Still a work in progress, not done. What I'm most proud of, though, is not any particular bill. It's the fact that I began work on an initiative which I think changed the state of California profoundly. And what it was a majority vote for the state budget. We used to sit for most of my time in the assembly.
All summer long.
Terrible.
All summer long.
I
That's
can't tell you
right.
how many
All
trips with the
summer
family I
long.
missed.
Making terrible cuts in the state budget,
Terrible
having
policy.
the press say, oh, the legislature is bickering again. So watching the respect for government go down the tubes. And then, because we didn't have 2/3 Democrats, we would always have to buy the votes of 1 or 2 Republicans with things often not related to the budget at all, but to get those votes. It felt like being held hostage. It was terrible. And when I first started saying to my colleagues, we got to change this or nothing will ever get better, leadership was not interested. They said it's pie in the sky, never happened, forget it. But about 12 of us legislators did get together. We worked with some very strong union leaders, and by God, the thing passed. To get it passed, we were told by the polling that there was so little respect for the legislature that we would have to agree to completely forfeit our salary for every day the budget was late. Well, we didn't like that. We thought it was disrespectful, but we did it. And the very first year after the proposition took effect and we had a simple majority, we got a budget on time. It became clear to the press and the public that the problem was that we didn't have enough money for the things the people of California wanted and needed. And that November, Governor Brown put a tax measure on the ballot and it passed. And we ended what I would call the Prop 13 curse, if you will, that nobody could ever deal with the question of taxes because the people of California voted to increase their own taxes. And I feel like it was the beginning really of the upward spiral that I see our state in now in terms of leadership on many of the issues we face in the country.
Wow, thank you. Senator Pavley, how about you?
Well, I sort of focused on legislation because that's what you were thinking about, Lonnie. That was a great example of making an incredible difference, and we got our summers back. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Especially with my husband being a teacher. If you,
Right,
that was his only time off. That was not fun. I learned to love Lake Tahoe because I could go up and down quickly and be there and come back to session. So I became a huge champion of preserving Lake Tahoe. That's the benefit of having to spend all my summers in Sacramento. Anyway, I told you I focused on 2 or 3 things as my way to deal with term limits. And so I thought I'd talk about those. I was on the water committee all 14 years, and Lois was too. She's a champion of that. and we learned to work very well together.
We did.
I wasn't stealing her water. We were trying
No, you didn't.
but water is
Thank
the
you.
most politically complicated subject, far more, in my opinion, than taxes or anything else, is water, because it's geographic. Boy, when there's less water, who gets it? And we have laws in our state constitution that make it very difficult to deal with this growing population, less water, and the competition with agriculture. So what I ended up focusing on was one of my first bills was reducing the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from the tailpipe of automobiles. Because I grew up in Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley during the smog-filled days of the 60s, where air pollution from cars was the #1 source of pollution. Well, greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles, we have over 25 or 30 million vehicles in California. Our #1 source is mobile sources towards climate change. And so that seemed like just a simple bill to carry. So I had passed that bill. It took 2 years, the first session. It took, what I learned to do is build coalitions. So the messengers were very diverse. And for many groups, it was the first time they ever had come to Sacramento. Interfaith Power and Light formed. Environmental entrepreneurs, their first bill, and we had a whole long list, and a lot of healthcare providers. So the messaging became an important lesson. But what I really learned about this bill, as it went through and finally passed, is that under the Federal Clean Air Act, boy, is California in a special place. There is a carve out for California to pass more stringent air and now climate pollution standards from vehicles, providing we get approval through a waiver authority of the Environmental Protection Agency. And that's how we got unleaded gas and catalytic converters, and the list goes on and on. So this bill finally passed, multiple lawsuits. But the other thing in the Federal Clean Air Act, passed by Congress, this wasn't an executive order, passed by Congress, was that other states in the country could adopt the nation's weaker standards or California's stricter standards. So I passed a bill that turned out to be, not intentionally, but the first in the nation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. 17 other states have now adopted that. And we have automobile manufacturers that had sued in 5 states and sued California too, in trying to stop them, who are now all on board. They invite me to the auto show every year to show all their alternative fuel vehicles, their electric vehicles and other zero emission vehicles. They're seizing the challenge of producing these cars, not just for California, but globally. And the other takeaway from all this that I hadn't realized as a former middle school teacher, California with close to 40 million people can be really an amazing market. When we do something and change a rule or regulation, not only are we a laboratory, but we send such strong market signals because of our buying power that we attract investment dollars here. So the takeaway from all this was businesses came to California, not in spite of all of our climate regulations, whether it's from renewable energy or cleaner vehicles, but they tell me today it's because of them, because we created a market for investment and innovation. And we are seeing a transition, and we're in that process of revolution, but unfortunately climate change is coming faster than we ever thought it would. So thank you for allowing me to share with you why that's important to me, and hopefully the rest of the country.
Well, thank you for doing it. Senator Wolk, what are you most proud of from your time in the legislature?
Well, first I want to say how important what Fran did and what Loni did during their times in the legislature. And it was fun to watch them be successful. It was really very important to the future of this state. We all 3 of us passed, many bills. That happens in the legislature, like over 100. All of us did that. And, asking me to choose which one I thought was the most important was really difficult. But of course, all my bills are really meaningful. So the one that I that took the most effort was the one that I did with others at the end of my tenure, and that was medical aid in dying for California, taking the Oregon law and transforming it into one that would pass and be signed and go into effect here in California. And that would allow, of course, those at the last stage of life who are dying and usually in terrible pain to have a physician assist them. That it was very difficult because of the personal nature of the subject, the toughness of the opposition. And that was the California Medical Association. No medical association had ever gone neutral, let alone supported a bill. We were able to remove their opposition, which was key to its passage. And it used all of the skills that I had and that my co-authors had as well to make this happen. Listening to individual members of the entire legislature, the process, knowledge of the process, being able to persuade, and for people to trust me and my colleagues in our motives, perhaps our understanding of the subject, and our willingness to accept when they did not agree. It was, after all, a personal moral choice. I'm also proud of having established the Firearm Violence Research Center at the University of California, which took the place of the congressional lack of research on the part of NIH. And that has since been changed. And also the flood management package. Fran and I were very active in water. There are too many things to remember, but the important one for my region and for the state of California was requiring a 200-year level of flood protection before any housing could be constructed in flood-prone areas. And that has changed and will continue to change the face of the Central Valley. And then just on a personal note, and I think this is true for all of us, during the hurly-burly of the 14 years and before that, I'm happy to say that I succeeded in remaining married happily for 53 years. And the fact that both my sons, who I started in this business when they were in junior high and high school, I always worried about that, but both my sons have told me that they loved watching me and doing politics, and that influenced them to do the same. And my younger son became mayor after me, and my older son, when he's finished with his vocation, is going to do public health and try and run for the legislature in North Carolina. I'm very proud of both of them and relieved that all those nights away and days away and hard work and kept them whole.
Well, thank you. Thank you all three. I mean, that's just great examples right there of just the amazing work that you did during your distinguished careers. I wanted to remind our audience that if you have questions for the senators, you can post those to our team in the Q&A, I guess, button at the toolbar in the bottom here of Zoom. If you have any questions during our question and answer period that will be coming up shortly. I wanted to ask, there's really no shortage of critiques about government. And from those who, of course, been working in government, both on the state level as well as the local level, from your experience, what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have of government and politics? And Senator Hancock, let's start with you.
Well, there are many, and some of the criticisms the public has are well deserved. Unfortunately, Fran talked a little bit about people filling in seat time. Certainly one of the things I've worked on and that needs a lot of work in the future is the role of money in politics, so that there's a level playing field for people and for ideas. But I think the major misconception that troubles me is the number of people who say, oh, it's too big, too expensive, too out of control. You can't really do anything. It doesn't make a difference. And I get especially worried when I hear young people talk like that, because that isn't the case. Any number of organized people, I mean, Margaret Mead was right, never doubt that a few dedicated people can change the world, because that's all that ever has or ever will. And I certainly have seen in my experience, again, because I started from a very controversial position of advocacy, ideas that were considered radical in the 1960s or 70s or 80s are now widely recognized and mainstream. So my hope is that people will realize what a difference they can make. And it isn't just about money, it's about people and expressing ideas and coming to places like Sacramento and Washington and making your views known. And yes, having a demonstration every so often to get people to get attention and get the press so that you can explain your issues. But the system, the democratic system is such a treasure because it does allow people to change the conditions under which they live and get a better break for themselves and for their children. So I just wish we could get everybody involved in the great adventure of trying to save the planet and save an equitable society.
That's well said. Senator Pavley, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about government and politics?
Well, one thing I do when because I think all of us think about passing the torch, and that's what I did. So I probably speak in several colleges during the year, and I'm teaching a class now, or I'm a speaker in a class now, and spend Mondays with them. I get excited about the optimism and the room full of students that are very interested in, well, some of the subjects I care about, but they're very interested in that and they're passionate about it. And a lot of people are now majoring in public policy because they want to make a difference in these variety of issues and areas. They might not be in the science world, or they might not be going into law school, but public policy drives them. And I think what's happening on the federal level has really hurt the perception of how people can work together despite differences of opinion from political parties. I've never seen it. I've never seen it like this my whole life, you know, the personal attacks and anyway, so that's hard. But students, when I talk to them, one of the misconceptions they have is you have to have connections to people with money or be wealthy yourself to run for politics. That's the only way you can engage. So I like to share with them the middle school teacher story, and my husband's a middle school teacher. There was no connection, but what the connection was, talking to people who shared the same values and priorities you did, and finding other people that cared. And maybe it means you're staying 20, 30, or 40 years in the same area, and you have this grassroots sort of support group. Maybe you're active in your church or other organizations, but getting engaged in whatever level you think you can make a difference, whether it's your children's schools or whatever it is incredibly important. And then you can build up, you can either work for a legislator or an agency, private or public sector, in some meaningful policy things. And maybe someday you'll want to run for office yourself. I'm a huge advocate of younger generation. It's very hard in those bigger cities because you do need access to money to run a campaign. But the smaller communities, whether it's a school board or a water board or a city council, you can make an incredible difference. So I think having middle school teachers and high school teachers and organizations get students involved, whatever the issue is, and they can see that by grouping together, they can really affect some change and make their community better. Pick an issue.
Yes, indeed. Senator Wolk, what's your take on this?
Well, I agree with much of what Loni and Fran have been talking about. I'm a little less optimistic than you are, Loni and Fran. You know, more and more people, you know, really talk about the misconception is that politics is a dirty business. We're dishonest, not we, politicians are dishonest. They don't work hard, they're self-interested. And I'm afraid to say, you know, what's happening at the federal level doesn't help that. I'm not sure about what's going on in some of our cities as well. You know, they're people, you can tell by the jokes that people make that, you know, there's a bit of truth in humor. Some of the misconceptions that exist about legislation, that legislating is the only way to solve a problem. Or that it's an easy way to solve a problem, or it is the final word on a major problem. Complexity and multi-layered issues, people don't have the patience for that. People used to come to the legislature and talking about, they'd like me to do a bill to fix this or fix that or this particular thing. A corollary to that is that legislation is not fast. In fact, it's very slow, and people are more and more impatient these days for solutions. So I'm just not as optimistic. We're having a terrible time recruiting people to run for office. And that's a tremendous challenge to democracy, because that's what we have. Our institutions are based on people willing to step up and act. And I'm a little less optimistic than my colleagues, but it's good to hear them talk.
Well, we wanted to leave time for questions from the audience, and my good friend and colleague at the State Archives, Ignacio Sanchez Alonso, has been tracking those. It's almost like a Thanksgiving parade. Ignacio, I'd like to turn it over to you now. Senators, thank you for my time. And Ignacio, please chime in with the questions from the audience.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate it. So the first question we have was actually directed towards Senator Hancock. But I believe you already answered that question completely. And it was basically about Prop 25. And if you believe, you know, the majority vote has resulted in the changes that you envisioned. And I think you touched on that quite a bit already, but I just wanted to ask again, see if you had any final thoughts on that.
You know, I think that there are some parallels to the situation of the filibuster in Washington. And I think I'd just like to end with a colleague of mine in the Senate, Joe Samiti, and Fran, and you know Joe, put it best when he said, in a democracy, every voice should be heard. Because of course, the argument for the filibuster or the 2/3 vote is it will make them compromise. But in fact, it didn't, and it doesn't now. In a democracy, every voice should be heard. But when the minority control the majority, the system is broken because no one can be held accountable. And I think that we've learned more and more that the structure of our democracy is so important, because our democracy really is an extraordinary gift that does have to be protected because it makes all other positive change possible.
Thank you for that. This next question here, it's not directed to any one person, so I will kind of go around and see get everyone's take. And to the person who submitted the question, I apologize if I butcher your name, but the question is from Nick Schroeder. And Nick asked, has term limits given too much power to staff? Senator Pavley, why don't we start with you?
I think there is a lot more power in staff, and the importance of hiring really competent staff, and especially not only as your chief of staff, but your policy staff, the people that work behind the scenes for the chair of the policy committee that they're affecting. We need them to be there a long time. And I don't think I think they've added to it, because most of these policies take years, if not decades, to implement. The secret to success in California, we're only one of 5 states with a full-time legislature. The secret to success is we have some of the best policy staff in some of these key policy committees, and we have some of the best agencies. So in the climate world, the California Energy Commission and the Air Resources Board, they attract people from all over the country in the world who are the best and the brightest in these fields. So that's some of our strengths. And I think a legislator coming in, managing staff is a really important skill that you maybe learned in private sector, if that's what you did, or through local government experience. So I see it as an asset, or my experiences, and I really valued my staff, and learning how to delegate and steer them in the way and the direction I would like to go. Really kept them committed to really good outcomes. They worked very, very hard. In fact, I hear from all my former staff all the time.
Thank you. Senator Wolk, what are your views on this question? Has term
Yeah, I
limits?
think it's a very good question. And I had thought about adding something into the term limits discussion. Yes, far too much power to staff. When you had members who were more powerful, and therefore, due to the fact that they were there year after year after year, there was more of an even relationship. I think term limits really did affect a lot of change with respect to staff, and I don't think it's good. I think it's not clear to me where, they're not elected, but many felt that they had all the answers, and often they did not, and had less experience than many of the members who were serving. But it's also important to note that there are no term limits on lobbyists either, and their power has increased dramatically. Their numbers have increased dramatically. And in fact, during our tenure, the three of us, the lobbyists started to become, some of the powerful lobbies started to become active in the elections for the primary elections for assembly members. So they could control who would help them out with an extraordinary amount of money, mostly energy companies and anti-environmental direction and oil and gas. And it's become untenable, I think. And it's not clear to me what the answer is, but one of the answers is when you do have term limits, the power will go elsewhere. And that's what I think that's one of the problems.
Thank you for that. Senator Hancock, what do you think?
Well, as usual, I think I agree in some ways with both of my very good colleagues and friends. On the one hand, if you had staff that was totally inexperienced, you'd be totally at the mercy of lobbyists. And longevity does matter. Now, we used to joke, if you remember, in the early years about the Mandarin staff, the people who had all the institutional memory and knew what levers could be pushed and could tell you an idea wouldn't fly when maybe it really would. But also, I think the longer people are there, the more they do understand the system. and the more they can help the people that they are working with. I found my staff that had considerably more experience than I did when I went in to be absolutely essential to me. And I think part of it is this business of you become a working team, and which is a little different from some of the other Mandarin staff that can be off in the speaker's office or the pro tem's office, right? And also, one thing I loved was watching my staff in my office mentor younger people, and all the young people that come in and really want to make a difference and learn from the people that have been there longer. So, like again, almost anything in life, it is a mixed bag. The lobbyists, the issues are so complex that you're learning all the time, especially when you first get there. So you have to have, I guess, the self-confidence to maneuver through it. But it is complicated, and certainly less experienced members gives more power to staff and to lobbyists.
Thank you for that. I think we have probably time for one last question from our Q&A. And this question is actually for Senator Hancock. And the question comes from Beth W. The question reads, Senator Hancock, do you think the increase in crime over the past couple of years will result in a backslide of rehabilitation and reentry efforts? Public sentiment seems to be slipping back to the quote unquote punishment model versus shifting to the CDCR. And I wonder if we're 3 steps ahead and 5 steps back.
I don't think we're going to go 5 steps back. I've been impressed over time with the fact that it is an eclectic process where you can go 2 steps ahead and half step back, maybe even 1 step back. But the change that we made in California with criminal justice, it's still very tenuous, because what we really needed was culture change, and that you cannot legislate. I mean, the conditions of confinement were brutal in our state prison, and they probably often still are. But realignment, which Jerry Brown spearheaded with the help of those of us on the committees, after the US Supreme Court said that incarceration in a California state prison was cruel and unusual punishment, and said we either had to get people out of there or they would start releasing people. We were able to really talk about how do people get helped to return to their communities as safe neighbors. And we had some fabulous advocacy groups and groups that went into prisons. We now have the community colleges doing transferable sequences of courses while people are incarcerated. It is, I don't know if I agree that we're taking steps back. The sort of arguments over how to treat drug abuse and that sort of thing, I don't think are going to affect the big picture. I hope not. I hope not, because we've only just begun making the changes that have to happen. I mean, I could go on about this because I ended up getting real expertise in this, and everything from solitary confinement to the lack of opportunity, reentry, sentencing, so much work to be done, and so many brilliant people who are interested in helping. So I hope we've only taken a few little steps back.
Thank you. Thank you all for answering those questions and for your very insightful answers and views. Now I will pass it over to Tamara Martin, the chief of the archives, and let her have, I think she has some closing statements for us. So Tamara, I'll pass it on to you.
Great, thank you so much, Ignacio. So we want to thank you for joining us this evening, and we want to extend a special thank you to Senator Loni Hancock, Senator Fran Pavley, and Senator Lois Wolk for participating in the California State Government Oral History Program and for speaking as a part of this program tonight. We really appreciated hearing your stories, and we look forward to learning more as we listen to them. We also wanted to thank Dr. Todd Holmes and his team at the Oral History Center for their tremendous work facilitating these interviews, and to the UC Berkeley for being our valued partners in these efforts. We want to also thank our staff who helped make tonight's evening possible and who work hard every day to contribute to this program's success and for providing access to the archive's collections. The California State Government Oral History Program is an important part of the State Archives public programming, and these interviews make up a critical component of the historical record, and we want to express our appreciation for the members of the State Government Oral History Advisory Committee who provide important recommendations to our office for individuals to be interviewed. We look forward to ongoing releases of more new oral history interviews with our university partners. These will focus on state leaders as well as new efforts to capture important issues and stories of diverse individuals who are trailblazers and have helped shape California, but their stories may not be as well known. We invite you to read, listen to, and explore the transcripts, audio, and video from oral history interviews on the State Archives webpage, or you can visit us in person in our research room here in Sacramento. Interviews created in partnership with the Oral History Center at UC Berkeley are also available on the State Government Oral History Project page on their website, which they posted in the chat. And if you have any questions about tonight's program, the State Government Oral History Program, or if you're interested in signing up for our email list for updates on our programs or future events, you can email us at archivesevents@sos.ca.gov. We look forward to seeing you at a future event. Thank you again to our panelists, to our moderator, to UC Berkeley, and to all of you for joining us here tonight. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.